Hello, it's Friday. I'm Matt Donnelly, and this is the Fantasy Points Friday Night Hype Show for week number 12. We have ourselves a bunch of games that we are going to get into here in just a second. I mean, the meat sweats are real this week, and so are some of these contests. But hey, we just finished watching that Thanksgiving Day triple header there. We had Dallas hosting the New York Giants there, and the Giants, they had that backdoor cover thing working for them. We also seen the Detroit Lions push the Buffalo Bills right to the limit there. And to close out the whole shebang there, we had the Patriots losing a tough one there to primetime Kirk Cousins. And you know what? He wasn't so bad. And let's put a little bit of respect on McCorkle Jones because he came out to play 382 yards, couple touchdowns. Yeah, that's a pretty good week there. That being said, the games that we are going to look at, the games that have me hyped, are the Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus the Cleveland Browns, the Cincinnati Bengals versus the Tennessee Titans, the Los Angeles Chargers and the Arizona Cardinals, and the Green Bay Packers versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Before we get into this week's slate of games, let's talk about some injuries that could impact some fantasy lineups across the fantasy universe here, starting with Justin Fields, who's dealing with that shoulder injury. You know what? This is one of those things where it's like, do the Bears decide to push him out there or do they decide to rest him? They know what they got for him. For save the future here, go with Trevor Siemian. More on that here in a second. Joe Mixon, as of Thursday, he was still in concussion protocol. Mike Williams is dealing with that ankle injury. Do not expect him back this week. Wan'Dale Robinson, man, this one hurts on a different level. The guy was out there balling 9 catches, 100 yards. Then he tore his ACL. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, he's dealing with a high ankle sprain. He's on the IR. You got Kyle Pitts also on the IR there with an MCL injury. Kadarius Toney, hey, water is wet, and Kadarius Toney has a pulled hamstring. Leonard Fournette, he looks like he's going to play this week. He's got a hip pointer injury there. But hey, I like myself a little bit of Rachaad White a little bit more this week. Jaylen Warren, he's dealing with a little something there. Gerald Everett, he looks like he's going to be ready to go there after missing a good portion last week there with that groin injury. Jerry Jeudy, he's still got that ankle injury. Corey Davis, he looks like he's ready to go. And we got some other possible returns this week that look promising, including Gus Edwards, Jamar Chase, and Marquise Brown, and more on those guys a little bit later as well. But if you want the latest up-to-date injury information, make sure you are checking out Fantasy Points' very own Edwin Porras there and the Fantasy Points podcast for those latest injury updates as we head into Week 12. We already seen what happened on Thursday night. That's 6 teams already out of the picture. Now we need to gear up and get ready. Starting with Denver at Carolina, free DJ Moore. You can't start him with Baker Mayfield on the center. He was averaging his 3.3 receptions and just 37 yards per game. So now the Carolina Panthers, they realize that they are going back to Sam Darnold. And you know what? That just kind of felt gross. That's probably your best option. Now, Baltimore at Jacksonville. The last 2 weeks, the Ravens are allowing the 4th fewest points per game to the receiver position. That said, Christian Kirk, you can still start him with confidence as he has a history of producing versus cover 4 and cover 6 coverages with those split safeties. Working out of the slot, he's likely going to avoid Marlon Humphrey, which is an added bonus. Houston at Miami. The Texans are turning the keys to the Buick over to Kyle Allen, who steps in for the benched Davis Mills. Miami earned a few more offensive plays this week against the worst run defense in the league. Fire up that Jeffrey Wilson share you have there and do it with confidence. Chicago at the New York Jets. Trevor Siemian versus Mike White. Siemian is likely to get the start here due to that shoulder injury to Justin Fields there, while White replaces Zach Wilson, who, well, he hasn't been very good. Atlanta at Washington. Jerry Rice, Eric Metcalf, Tyreek Hill, and now add Curtis Samuel to the list of players in the Super Bowl era there with 600-plus rushing yards, 6-plus rushing touchdowns, 2,500 receiving yards, and 15-plus receiving touchdowns. Debo who? I know it's 2022, but why are teams still kicking the ball to Cordero Patterson, who now has a kickoff return touchdown record all to himself? Patterson's 7 100-plus touchdowns are 4 more than the next closest player in NFL history. Las Vegas at Seattle. Carr is 8-2 in career overtime games, the best winning percentage by any quarterback with 10 or more overtime games in their career. The second best, that's Tom Brady at 10-4. Yeah, that's a 7-14 winning percentage. Now, I know things have been bad in Vegas this season, And the Raiders can get out of Carr's deal by season's end, but be careful what you are asking for. Now, on the other side of the ball, Geno Smith is the top fantasy quarterback per dropback when facing cover one, which is what the Raiders are likely to run. DK Metcalf, Will Dissly, they rank near the top of their positions respectively when facing that coverage. Los Angeles Rams at the Kansas City Chiefs. I fell for it like a fool. I gave him one more chance. Never again, Kadarius Toney. Never again. Can't do it. Won't do it. Fool me once. Shame on you. Fool me twice. That's on me. Now, New Orleans at San Francisco. Chris Olave has averaged the 6th most receiving yards by a rookie with a minimum of 10 games since 1970, trailing only Odell Beckham Jr., Justin Jefferson, Anquan Bolden, Jamar Chase, and Randy Moss. That's some pretty good company. And on Monday night, under the primetime lights, we have the Indianapolis Colts hosting the Pittsburgh Steelers. Pittman and Campbell both look like great plays this week for fantasy, as long as the Colts can find a way of slowing down TJ Watt. And I don't think there's very many teams that are able to do that. Now let's get right into the games of the week, the games that have me excited, the games that you should have circled on your calendar, starting with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the Cleveland Browns. Brady and the Bucs, they are coming off a bye, but that hasn't stopped Antonio Brown from being on social media. The dude, he just needs to go away. And you know what? Burn that camera roll. Last time we saw Brady and the Bucs in action, they were in Germany. They were taking on the Seahawks and starting to resemble a first-place club. I mean, a legit first-place team there, not just one that's leading that NFC South. Julio Jones, Leonard Fournette, and Chris Godwin all found a way into the end zone there, while Brady completed 22 of 29 passes for 258 yards. Now, Brady, he is currently 4th in the NFL in passing yards with 2,805. That trails only Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, and Joe Burrow through 11 weeks. The touchdown passes have not been there for him as they have been in recent years, but he does have one of the best touchdown to interception ratios in the league, throwing 12 touchdowns to just 2 interceptions. Only 2 qualified quarterbacks have thrown an interception on fewer than 1% of their passes this season. Tom Brady and Daniel Jones. The reason why this Bucs offense seems to finally be getting it right is Chris Godwin seems to be finally getting himself healthy, recovering from that ACL surgery. Now, the one thing that they missed was someone making plays like Rob Gronkowski between those hash marks, and that is a role that Chris Godwin has recently filled. He finally got his first touchdown of the season last week, and I think we may have caught a small glimpse of what to expect on the back half of the season. Mike Evans is doing what Mike Evans does best, and that is pacing himself to another 1,000-yard season as he has converted 49 catches into 671 yards thus far. That's right. Evans sits just 329 yards away from his 9th consecutive 1,000-yard season to start his career. He also only needs 28 yards this week for 10,000 on his career, which would make him just the 12th player to do so with the same team. So you know what happens there. When there's records on the line, Brady's going to make sure that you're going to get them. Now, Fournette, he had to leave that game in Germany a little bit earlier there, leaving the rookie there from Arizona State, Rachaad White, to have one of his breakout games overseas. White made the most of his opportunities there, running the ball 22 times for 105 yards. Now, there is a chance that Fournette plays in this game, but he's not, in my opinion, he's probably not going to be 100%. So expect this backfield to be a 1A, 1B type situation, kind of like what they have going on in Dallas with Tony Pollard there and Ezekiel Elliott. White certainly is the more explosive of the two, forcing 5 missed tackles back in week number 10. Now, Cleveland, is this Brissett's last stand? This is a man that has nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Next week, Deshaun Watson is officially able to return against his former team there, the Houston Texans. It's funny how that works. I mean, the NFL, you know what? We're not going to go there today. We need to focus on what Brissett has done and what he has meant for this offense here in Cleveland. Last week against the Bills, 28 of 41 for 324 yards and 3 touchdowns, hooking up with Amari Cooper twice. Donovan Peoples-Jones on another occasion. Brissett sits 13th in the NFL in passing yards this season with 2,398, while his yards per attempt is at 7.2. Now, I can think of several teams out there right now that could use that kind of production from under center. Cooper, thanks in part to Brissett, he sits inside the top 15 in the NFL in total receiving yards there with 698, and in top 20 there in receptions with 50, and top 5 in touchdowns with 7. It also helps that when you are one of 5 players with 10 or more end zone targets this season. Now, I'm not sure the addition of Watson actually helps Cooper at this point because Brissett has been so effective. It's hard to imagine that for 2 fifth-round draft picks, your favorite team could have had Amari Cooper. Now, Cooper's home splits have been very favorable, especially compared to his road split so far this season. Now, that's probably more tied into the corners in which he has faced on the road. At home, Cooper has averaged almost 6.2 more targets, 3.9 more receptions, 57.6 more receiving yards, and 15.2 more fantasy points per game than what he has been able to produce on the road. Technically, last week's game was in Detroit, not Buffalo, so it's kind of more of a neutral ground game, so I don't know if that counts for a road split or, you know what, I'll let the statisticians there, the guys who get paid a lot more than me, figure that kind of stuff out. Now, Tampa Bay's defense has shown improvement the last few weeks, and they have had the bye to help prepare themselves for Nick Chubb, who comes into this contest 4th in rushing yards, 2nd in rushing touchdowns, and 1st in runs greater than 10 yards. Chubb's greatest contribution has been the fact that he's at 71.2 fantasy points in the 4th quarter alone this season. That sits second to just Kenneth Walker. The deeper the game gets, the more Chubb you are going to see. Chubb leads the NFL in missed tackles forced with 54, and that's after last week's 19 yards on the ground on 14 carries there against the Buffalo Bills. We go from one big running back to another big running back. We're going to talk about the Cincinnati Bengals and the Tennessee Titans. But first, let's talk about the Cats there in Cincinnati. Now, the latest news out of Cincinnati is that Jamar Chase is set to make his return this week against the Titans secondary that has allowed almost 1,900 yards and 13 touchdowns to receivers this season. In the last 4 weeks, Tennessee is allowing over 36 fantasy points per game to the position. So this feels like a good time to work Chase back in very slowly and very productively. Since Chase has been gone, Joe Burrow has been spreading the ball around. After T. Higgins' 27 targets, Joe Mixon and Tyler Boyd, they have 17 and 18 targets respectively, while Hayden Hurst, Samaje Perine, and yes, Trent Irwin have also been utilized in the passing game. Against the Steelers, Higgins hit them up for 148 yards and a touchdown to go along with those 9 grabs. Getting Chase back will stretch this Titans secondary likely too thin. Now, last week, Joe Burrow put this offense on his back, throwing for 4 touchdowns along with 355 yards, doing all this while avoiding TJ Watt much of the game. Tennessee, they held Rodgers and Packers to 5.8 yards per attempt last week and 227 yards. But on the season, this Titans secondary, they are allowing the 10th most fantasy points per game, allowing an average of 33.6 per contest. It's not just the receivers catching passes. Burrow likes to get his backs involved too, as evident in last week's contest there, where they combined for 7 catches and 94 yards. Jeffrey Simmons hit a man-child in the middle of that Titans defense there. He will be the one responsible for disrupting this Bengals passing attack. Simmons is one of 3 Titans to register at least 5 sacks this season. The other 2, Denico Autry, who is so underrated right now, he's got 7. That leads the team. And Rashad Weaver there with 5.5. Burrow this season, he has been sacked on 32 occasions, which is the 3rd most in the NFL. Now, fantasy managers are going to need to keep an eye on the injury report as it pertains to Joe Mixon, who left last week's contest due to a concussion and has yet to pass the NFL's concussion protocol as of Thursday. If Mixon can't go, then look for Samaje Perine to fill in once again. Perine had 30 rushing yards on 11 carries last week, while the Titans defense has allowed the 2nd fewest rushing yards this season at 822 and the 4th fewest fantasy points per game at 16.2 per game to opposing backs. So if Perine is going to be effective for fantasy managers, it's going to have to likely come in the passing game. For Tennessee, Derrick Henry, he is just built differently. His 5 consecutive seasons of 10 or more rushing touchdowns joins an elite list that includes only 4 other names: LaDainian Tomlinson, Adrian Peterson, Sean Alexander, and Michael the Burner Turner. Now, per Graham Barfield's Week 12 stat pack over on fantasypoints.com. By the way, you can get that subscription today by using promo code HYPE22. Just going to throw that out there. Treylon Burks broke out in a big way on Thursday Night Football this past week as the Titans made a huge point to get him the rock. Burks has been targeted on 14 of 47 routes. That's 0.3 targets per route run there over the last 2 weeks there, resulting in 7 receptions for 111 yards and making a couple plays against Jair Alexander in coverage. Now, can we talk for just a moment how good Ryan Tannehill has been? since he has returned to the lineup. This offense seems to be regained a little something extra in the last couple contests there. Tannehill has thrown for 255 yards against a Broncos team that you wouldn't think a guy like Ryan Tannehill should be able to throw against, and then 333 yards against the Packers last week. This all comes after a Titans team that hadn't surpassed 140 yards in the previous 5 contests. Tannehill, he may not be in that elite tier of quarterbacks, but you know what? When it comes to efficiency, he's going to get that job done. With Burks finally getting going, this offense is starting to resemble a unit from the past season here that has gave defensive coordinators headaches. Henry, he runs the ball, then he runs it again, and then he runs it again. And then when you think you've got this all figured out, Tannehill, he hits Burks, and the defense is stuck in this continuous loop. Even Robert Woods smashed his receiving prop last week, catching 6 of 7 targets for 69 yards. And yes, sadly, I took the under. The Bengals, they allowed the Steelers receivers to come away with 143 yards and a touchdown while allowing a 112.2 passer rating to Kenny Pickett. Najee Harris, he kept the Bengals defense honest, which helped Kenny Pickett make some plays along the way. You have to feel that the Titans saw that and said, you know what? We can do even better. Sam Hubbard, Trey Hendrickson, they'll be looking to get some pressure on Tannehill. As this Titans team, they are allowing 37% pressure rate there on their quarterbacks dropbacks this season. Cincinnati, blitz percentage 24.9%, while their pressure percentage is at 29.4%. Our third game we were going to talk about here, the Los Angeles Chargers, they're heading to the desert to take on the Arizona Cardinals. For Los Angeles, it certainly looked like we got the old Justin Herbert back last week, going 23 of 30 for 280 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Chiefs on Sunday Night Football. It also helps when you are getting key pieces of this offense back. We saw Mike Williams briefly, and we also seen Keenan Allen make his return. Need another reason to love Herbert this week? How about the Cardinals on the season have allowed a 100 passer rating, and just last week, they let Jimmy Garoppolo post a 131.9 passer rating. That's got to feel pretty good for Justin Herbert. Now, there's a good chance that these Chargers, they are going to be without Mike Williams for this contest as he re-aggravated that ankle injury. And while that does impact this offense, there are a couple things to take into account here. As Wes Huber of Fantasy Points pointed out, this is the only game this weekend that takes place in the Dome. No elements, just pure fantasy goodness. The second point here is that while Arizona sits in the middle of the pack in terms of fantasy points yielded to opposing receivers, over the last 4 weeks, they have allowed the 7th most fantasy points per contest to the quarterback position, allowing 19.77 per game. Arizona runs primarily cover 6 on the back end there, and that sits okay with Justin Herbert, who sits first in fantasy points per dropback against said coverage. In Allen's absence, Herbert's average depth of target never averaged more than 6 yards in his first game back. Allen not only played 73% of the snaps, but Herbert's A dot there climbed to 8.4, and Allen, in his return, caught 5 of 8 targets for 94 yards, including that big catch along the sideline. Now look for Jalen Thompson to drop down and handle Allen in the slot, which is an area which the Chargers can certainly exploit there. Who, as Thompson, he has yielded 0.4 fantasy points per route run so far this year. The expectation is, again, that Mike Williams is going to miss this week, which means Joshua Palmer will be looking to stack back-to-back big weeks here. Palmer, we know he's better suited to play that Mike Williams role there rather than the Keenan Allen role they kind of asked him to try and fill earlier this season. Now, Palmer against the Chiefs, 10 targets, 8 receptions, 106 yards, and 2 scores. Trayvon Mullen, yes, the Trayvon Mullen from the Raiders who couldn't cover anyone, he's covering nobody in Arizona either right now. He is going to be lining up across from Palmer on the left boundary. Arizona, they're going to need to pay extra attention to Austin Eckler, especially down in the red zone, where he ranks 3rd in red zone touches and 2nd in total touchdowns this season. Much of that, it was done with many of the other pieces here in this Chargers offense being on the mend. And he's also been averaging 19 touches per contest and has a 21% target share. Eckler, he sits inside the top 10 in targets with 83 and top 5 in receptions at 69. And I'm not talking about just the running back position. Now, for Arizona, the Cardinals are hoping that they have both Kyler Murray and Marquise Hollywood Brown available for this week's contest against this Chargers team. If you add Brown to DeAndre Hopkins, then this offense, it's going to level up in a hurry. When Brown left after 6 games, he was leading this Cardinals team in receiving with 485 yards in just 6 games, with 159 of those coming after the catch. When Hopkins returned to this Cardinals offense back in week number 7, he did so commanding targets immediately. He got a 33% target share, which is tied with Davante Adams of the Raiders for the most in the league. He's also responsible for 42% of the Cardinals' passing yardage, accumulating 487 yards in 5 contests there. Now, the responsibility to contain Hopkins is going to fall primarily on the shoulders of Mike Davis, who is allowing 0.26 fantasy points per route run along the left boundary there, where Hopkins has lined up 86% of the time. Hopefully, having both Hopkins and Brown will help get Kyler Murray back on track, as he has thrown for 2,168 yards, which works out to about 240 yards per game. Digging a little deeper, Murray has just 12 touchdown passes and 6 interceptions in 9 games, while averaging about 6 yards per attempt and an 86.9 passer rating. If Murray continues to struggle, then the Cardinals, they may be able to adjust for that a little bit and lean on James Conner in the run game a little bit more. Los Angeles is allowing 5.5 yards per carry this season. Not to mention, they've also been allowing 25.9 fantasy points per game, which is the 3rd most to running backs this year. Conner is pretty much the only back left in Arizona right now, and as such, he's probably going to get at least 95% of the snaps moving forward, and unless the Cardinals wave the white flag like they did down in Mexico last week. And finally, perhaps the game of the week here, Green Bay at Philadelphia. Darius Slay and James Bradbury are going to need to find an answer for Christian Watson. What's up with that? Now, yes, you heard that correctly. Watson double dipped on the touchdowns again last week, giving him 5 scores over the last 2 contests there. 8 catches, 155 yards, and 5 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks. Again, almost 63% of Watson's catches have turned into 6 points. Watson last week, he finished with 100 air yards, and that's after Randall Cobb returned to this Packers lineup. Over the last 6 weeks, 5 pass catchers. Davante Adams, A.J. Brown, Cole Kmet, Jawan Johnson, and Christian Watson have 5 touchdown receptions. Except Watson, he did that in 2 games. What does Christian Watson and Titans head coach Mike Vrabel have in common? They are the only 2 players since 2000 with 5 or more touchdowns and less than 20 receptions. Vrabel's 10 catches, 10 touchdowns in his career is one of those records that's likely never going to be topped. Now, remember all that talk about all these rookie wide receivers and Aaron Rodgers never having a good one? Of the 4 second-round picks that the Packers have spent on receivers, Watson's 6 touchdowns in 8 games, whereas Davante Adams, Randall Cobb, Jordy Nelson combined for just 6 touchdowns altogether combined in their rookie seasons. With all this Watson talk as of late, it feels like we're not talking about Allen Lazard nearly enough. And trust me, that's a phrase I didn't think I'd utter at any point this season. Lazard is wide receiver 23 in fantasy, and he has a 21.9% target share from Aaron Rodgers at a 33% of the team's air yards. He is 5th in deep targets and 9th in red zone targets. In order to get this passing game going, though, an offense that's been held under 20 points in 3 of the last 4 games, Rodgers and the Packers are going to need to do something about this Eagles front. The additions of Linval Joseph and Ndamukong Suh added even more depth along that defensive line that is going to basically rotate all game long and not lose much along the process. Eagles management identified that the loss of Jordan Davis was huge, so they went out and they fixed that. We talked about Suh, we talked about Joseph. Last week, they held Jonathan Taylor and the Indianapolis Colts to 3.8 yards per carry. This defense, it was already good, ranking 1st in total turnovers there with 20 and 7th in points per game allowed at 18.3. The Eagles' new additions, they came just in time as the Packers have posted 199 or more rushing yards on 4 occasions that have led to a 3-1 record in those games. Most of those yards have come courtesy of Aaron Jones, who's been averaging 5.4 yards per carry on the year and has been averaging 21 touches and 112.2 yards per contest over the last 4. The Eagles, they appeared to be a team on the ropes, a modern-day version of Rocky looking over at his corner and going, "Hey, Mick, cut me." After the loss to the Commanders in week number 10 and then narrowly escaping Indianapolis with a 1-point victory last week. Say what you want about this Eagles team, but Jalen Hurts carried this team last week. When they needed a first down, he got it. When they needed a touchdown, it was Hurts once again. Hurts was 18 of 25 last week there for 190 yards and a touchdown through the air while adding 86 yards on the ground and a touchdown with his legs on just 16 carries. Now, Goddard's absence was certainly noticeable there, as 16 of those 25 targets, they went to Devontae Smith or A.J. Brown. Now, Hurts, he is just the 4th quarterback in NFL history to rush for 20 or more touchdowns within their first 3 seasons. With his score before last week, he broke a tie with Kyler Murray for the third most rushing touchdowns by a quarterback over that period. Now, it was Smith that seemed to benefit the most from Goddard's absence here, as he saw the most targets that he has seen since back in week number 5, while catching 6 of them for 78 yards. But for the love of everything that is holy, can an Eagles receiver please not fumble the ball? That would be great. 2 weeks ago, it was Quez Watkins who made that costly mistake. And last week, Smith coughed up one himself. Looking at the matchups inside the matchups, how about A.J. Brown versus Jair Alexander? You would think that this would be a great battle on names alone, but the ugly truth is Alexander is allowing 0.31 fantasy points per route run this season, while A.J. Brown has been averaging 0.6 fantasy points per route. That gap is one of the bigger discrepancies in the quarterback receiver matchups this week, which is certainly an area that the Eagles are going to be looking to exploit in this week's matchup. Now, Devontae Smith on Eric Stokes, who is coming back from injury, is another advantage favoring the Eagles here and their passing attack. Stokes is giving up similar production as Alexander when looking at fantasy points per route run. And if the Eagles continue to force turnovers and gain those extra possessions, it's going to add up for fantasy managers. If you're looking for more wide receiver cornerback matchups, make sure to check out the Week 12 wide receiver cornerback matchup report, courtesy of Scott Barrett over on fantasypoints.com. If the Eagles decide to let Miles Sanders play this week and give him the damn ball, especially in the red zone, that would be great. Not just for a fantasy manager, but for my own sanity at this point. Green Bay, they sit 27th in rushing yards allowed per game and 21st in explosive run rate since week number 6. On the season, the Packers have allowed 22 fantasy points per contest there to opposing backs, which is the 8th most. All this is lining up great for Miles Sanders. Sanders, he ranks 10th all time in yards per attempt, averaging 5 yards per carry over his career. Yeah, that's right up there with Barry Sanders. That's more than Derrick Henry. Get the ball into Sanders' hands and good things are going to happen. I mentioned that the Packers are allowing the 21st most explosive runs. Well, Sanders has an explosive run on 14% of his attempts. That's probably why he's averaging 5 yards per carry. That all being said, what has you excited for week number 12? What matchups, what games, what matchups inside the matchups? Get in the comments below and let me know. If you're looking for that subscription to Fantasy Points, Hype 22, that's going to get you 10% off any package there over at fantasypoints.com. Not only do you get that, you get access to the Fantasy Points Discord where you get to talk with some of the brightest minds in fantasy football. That's right, we're talking about John Hansen, Joe Dolan, Scott Barrett, Graham Barfield, Wes Hubert, Jay Tribby, you name it. They're going to be in that Discord channel. And make sure that you are subscribed right here on the Fantasy Points YouTube channel there so you do not miss our weekly lineup. Monday grades, Wes Hubert, that's coming at you at 9 a.m. Eastern. Tuesday's plugged in DFS review with Scott Barrett and JM2Win. That's a 2 p.m. Eastern show. Wednesday, you got the midweek mailbag courtesy of Nick's script. And the daily lineup is coming at you with Joe Dolan every Tuesday through Friday, 9 a.m. Eastern. And of course, Fridays, 8 p.m. Eastern is the Friday Night Hype Show with me, Matt Donnelly, and I'm ready to go. I'm already sweating. You got me going. I am ready for Sunday. Let's go!